So
Right.
it notifies you a little bit. I don't think this notifies people go on. Maybe it does. I don't know
Oh,
if
it
it does or
doesn't. I mean, you can if you subscribe to the channel, it will notify people, but
Okay.
you have to subscribe.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, I just saw. I think it did get notified. So okay, I guess I'm notified.
Yeah.
Only 8 minutes late today. It's pretty good.
Yeah, not bad today.
No.
I got a new subscriber.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Well, that's cool.
I'm not going to type good morning to nobody that's not there.
No, this beer she gave us is pretty good, I will say. It's pretty solid. This beer is pretty good.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it'll be good. It'll be cold out today, I think. I wish the weather would just decide what it wants to do. It's like yesterday was great sitting outside, and then you think it's gonna be warm today, and then it just isn't. It's cold.
Yeah.
So that's all right.
5 people on here. I have to go on my phone to see who's on. Oh, good morning, David.
All right. Yeah, my thing doesn't notify me all that great, to be honest. Anyway, so anyway, that's the scoop of that. So yeah, so anyway, yeah, so here we go. Well, here we are. Someone had to get ready again. I was sitting here waiting, as always. Anyway, so what is going on today? You're kind of a chill night last night. It looks like you should be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed today.
Yeah, I didn't sleep the best, but whatever.
Yeah, you seem to survive St. Patty's Day pretty well. Your second St. Patty's Day here in the Boston area, so that was pretty good. So that's pretty sweet. So
Miranda said it snowed there last night. She's in Springfield, Illinois. Yeah, winter's not quite done yet.
No, but it feels like it's almost done. I mean, looking forward to, I think baseball starts in a week or two, so that's cool. And college basketball's winding down, college hockey's winding down. So yeah, so it's kind of getting that springtime. So pretty soon we'll be dealing with, and then you get to see me complain about the heat. So that'll be cool.
No, I've already had almost a whole summer of that. So
that's something nice. Just so yeah, so here we are again. Again going with this. So that's pretty cool. But no, it's good to get back at this. Yeah, we did this. We didn't do this last weekend, did we?
Yes, we did.
Or did we?
Yep.
I don't remember.
I'm pretty sure we did. Yep, we did last weekend.
Oh, it's tough. It's tough to remember. Too many brain cells being killed here, but that's good. So yeah, so how's your morning going? Okay.
Yep. How about you?
Yeah, well, it's fine. Oh, it's fine. It's soft serving sunshine as always in my little life. So it's all good. It's all good. So yeah, we'll get started here in a little bit. It's great. It's great to see people on social media traveling again, seeing some cool stuff. We've seen a lot of Tennessee pictures lately, a lot of Chattanooga, some Shiloh, some Frank.
Scott, who was on the roundtable the other night, he just got back from a trip to Chattanooga and Chickamauga, where he goes every year because Dave Powell and Jim Ogden, they lead a like kind of a walking tour thing at Chickamauga.
Yeah.
Cool. I'd love to go down for it some year. I know Ed used to help be part of that too. So and I'm looking forward to going there in a few weeks. And the one thing that Scott said when he was on the roundtable the other night is that there's such an appreciation for like the sight lines this time of year. Like you can see so much more because the foliage isn't out yet. So hopefully it's still kind of that way when we're there, because you can see more of how the battle unfolded. Although it's really cool to be there when I would love to go around the anniversary sometime.
A lot of people say the best time to go to visit a battlefield is around the same time of the battle is taking place.
Yeah. Because
you get an appreciation of the weather and the terrain, all that stuff. But I remember, going to Antietam, and it was late winter, early spring, like around March, and then going to Gettysburg like November for the first time. And the stuff you can see, it's a totally different environment. Now, they've done a lot of work at specifically Gettysburg on Copp's Hill, cutting the trees down. But if you go there now, you can walk Pickett's Charge, you can look and you can see through everything. You get such a better fascination for what the battlefields, all those little breastworks, all those little nooks and crannies that you can't go to, because a lot of these battlefields, you deal with bugs, you deal with snakes, you deal with those little sticky needly things, sticky bird things, stickers. So, and you're dealing with stuff, and then it's slime. But now, when you go now, you're dealing with the water and the slime and all that stuff. So I think it's the best time to go. I think that's a lot. It's a lot of fun to do that, because because what's cool about these battlefields for the most part is they let you go anywhere you want, provided it's not private property or it's or whatever.
I mean, if it's overgrown and swampy, like there's areas of Chickamauga that are kind of swampy that I discovered that you don't want to really go in. But for the most part, it's like, you can pretty much go anywhere. Chickamauga is a great one, and you'll see this when we're there in a few weeks, is a great one for going off the beaten path and finding little monuments that nobody knows they're there. They don't they're not visited very much. It's just really interesting to see that.
I know exactly. We talked a lot about the Fuller Monument, the genesis of the Rosewoods clown, right?
Yeah.
Was going to find that monument, and that's hard even now to find that.
Yeah.
Even with stone sentinels and all that stuff, it's still tough to find that. Yeah. But the summertime, good luck. You have to really.
The summertime in Chickamauga would be a lot like, in Gettysburg stuff would be a lot tougher to find. And like I said, I've been there at the very end of March, and then I've been there in mid-April. And both times, like, the foliage was different. March, I had a better view of sightlines on Snodgrass Hill and all that. But the one thing that, we're going to go to Chattanooga too, obviously, because Chattanooga's right there, and we're going to see some, Missionary Ridge and all that, which is like my background picture today is Claiborne on Missionary Ridge. It obviously does not look like that now. It's unfortunately not very well preserved, and it's in like a really shady area, like literally like.
Well, all the guys are gone. So it doesn't look like that, doesn't it? People are all gone, Mary. You said it doesn't look like it does right now. If we go there and it looks like that, that'll be something. We'll have to do it. We'll have to do a haunted history episode if that's the case. But it's cool though. And unfortunately, we've talked about this a million times. A lot of the battlefields in Virginia, Chantilly, for example, they're going away. They're gone. Franklin out west. So see them while you can. And a lot of these battlefields, they do a real good job, or they try to anyway, of working outside of that state funds to try to do a lot of the rehab acquisition, which is kind of a segue to our episode we just did. See what I did there?
Yes, I know. I was just going to say that's what Gettysburg Foundation does. Is they do, like, I knew all they did, but talking to Wayne the other night on our episode, you really gain an appreciation for what they do. Like, they are part of that Round Top rehabilitation. And, Wayne he really good perspective on it is one of the most, if not the most visited Civil War site in the US. Like, well, obviously it would only be in the US, but, of all the Civil War battlefields, and it needed work, or else it wasn't going to be preserved for future generations. And that's the one thing, when you work in the heritage field, you have to walk that fine line between allowing people access and be able to see it, but then how do we how is it preserved in the future? And that's what they're doing. And I'm sure they're going to do a great job of it. But, I still hate to read on Facebook, like, oh my God, I have to cancel my trip to Gettysburg because Round Top is closed. It's like, did you know there's like acres and acres of battlefield to explore? Like, you have Culp's Hill, you have East Cavalry Field. And there's also like Monocacy is like 30-40 minutes away. You can go there. It's like there's so much to do besides Round Top.
Oh, there's a lot of stuff to do. And what you were saying a second ago is how surprising it is. You assume, ABT, Battlefield Foundation, all the stuff they're doing to buy this land. And I don't think people realize, like you just said, Gettysburg Foundation has purchased a lot of that information. I mean, that land. They own the visitor center. They partner with the Park Service, but they're the ones who are putting all the money and all the work into Little Round Top. I think I said in the episode that Gettysburg Foundation is literally the straw that stirs the drink at Gettysburg. Yeah. They run everything. Wayne Moss is probably the single most, I don't want to say powerful guy, that's a phrase, but he's probably the most important guy in that whole thing.
Yeah, when it comes to the battlefield, because he's got to make the decisions and stuff. And Gentili mentions I'm embarrassed to say I didn't realize the foundation is all that stuff until your episode. I didn't either. I knew, they did a lot, but I didn't know it was that much. Oh, and he also mentions the experience at the Train Museum is excellent. Got to do it with the Samias last year. What you'd normally expect from a Civil War museum. And that's true. It is very, that train experience, that virtual reality is very, it's very unique. And I sometimes wonder how many, maybe other battlefields like Chickamauga, like Shiloh, maybe they will try something like that too, to bring more visitors in, right? Because as Wayne said, it's about getting people to go there, but also to come back. as well. And I think that's important for not just Gettysburg, but any battlefield is
No,
you've got to get the people there.
but specifically to Gettysburg, though, is people need to get, they come to the town and they go to Round Top, Devil's Den, the usual, and they stay in the south part of the town. They stay up Stein, where they don't get downtown. And I think people need to get in that mindset of that battlefield, that the whole town is a battlefield.
Yeah.
They fought throughout the entire town. So this is what this is doing. The Train Museum, the Children's Museum, they're bringing people into that downtown area. And what makes that Ticket to the Past event really unique, besides the VR thing, which is really cool, is it they're telling you in a lot of cases what happened at the actual site.
Yeah.
So when you sit there and you wear that ocular device thing, that big friggin' alien helmet there, and you look around and you're sitting there and you're seeing Abraham Lincoln arrive on the train, and you're seeing that's what he came. That's what you would have seen. And so it's unique, and it's really cool. I mean, and you don't have to be a history Civil War nut to appreciate it. I mean, and when I did the Basil Biggs one, and it's fascinating. He's the free black guy who went and dug up all the bodies and brought them to the battlefields for the National Cemetery. And you're literally sitting there like he's talking to you what he did, and there's all piled. It's not gruesome or anything, but he tells you the story. And I know you did Cornelia Hancock, right? And then Eli Blanchard is the other one, who was an Iron Brigade soldier, who was a musician, who helped do surgeon. And what's good about it, there's 3 different ones, so you got to go 3 times, right? And if they're smart, and they are, they will continue to update that. They'll have different characters. You'll have Tilly Pierce. You'll have, you'll have who knows.
Maybe somebody though that's not as well known. Like, I mean, nothing against Tilly Pierce and Jenny Wade, but I'd like to, Josephine Miller.
Yeah. There'll be a lot of stuff like that. You could tell me George Rose and the Rose Farm. Maybe they'll even do an Oliver Howard. They'll have to do an explicit XXX rating for that one for you, Mary. You'll get to get in line to buy tickets a month in advance and wait outside. The Oliver Howard experience, Mary. But for real though,
speaking of Howard, that just jogged my memory to what I found yesterday. Is I was looking for a picture of him with it's Howard, his son, and his grandson, and they're all in their military uniform. So it's like 3 generations, right? Couldn't find the picture, but what I did find is a couple of his obituaries. And so first of all, his last public appearance was in Canada, where he gave a lecture on Abraham Lincoln. So now
how many times did he die? How many obituaries does he have?
Well, there was one from the New York Times, and then this one.
I thought you would do a whole Rose Again thing. I thought you were going there.
Oh, there was one in this one that I found, I think was from like Idaho or something. But the one from the New York Times was really interesting because it talked about the fact that the year before he died, Congress passed a resolution to make him retired as a lieutenant general.
Right.
And the other thing too, when he died, is that he was the last general, let's see if I can say this right, last Union commander, meaning commanding an army, to die. So he was the last one left of the, you think George Henry Thomas is gone, George Meade is gone, Grant is gone, Sherman's gone, all these guys that commanded an army, and Slocum too, right? They're all gone. Howard's the last of them. And I don't know, something about that really, I don't say it hit me. It was like, I started thinking like kind of the human aspect of it. Well, how did he feel about that? Like to finally realize like, wow, all of us, those are the 3 of us on the March to Sea that were kind of the commanders on there. I'm the only one left. And Slocum died. Like Sherman was gone 1891, I think. Slocum was gone not too long after that. So Howard had quite a few years where he was like, kind of the only one.
Yeah.
In that. And I think Sickles was, I think, the last Corps commander from Gettysburg to pass away.
Yeah, he lived a long time, and maybe the Queen of Spain kept him alive somehow. Can you imagine? But Howard's death, Howard's death though is he dies in Burlington, Vermont, and he was an active guy. He would walk every day. That's his story of his death is fascinating because he's instead of walking home, he actually picks up a ride. Someone sees him walking, he gets picked up, and he walks in, walks to the door, goes in the middle of the day, walks right up to bed, lies in his bed, and just dies.
Yeah.
And what's cool, I know you're going to like this, we're going to go to Burlington, is the house he died in has the same doorknob
Yeah.
So you could turn the door up and your hand exactly where Howard did.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
I
I
know.
can't have to, I'm gonna have to hose you down for that one.
God.
But you can do it. And he's buried right along the lake there. So it's a
Yeah.
real, I haven't been up there, but it's a real pretty vista. If you've been
Yeah.
at Burlington, up by University of Vermont, he's up by there. But he lived a while, and contrary to popular belief, he didn't fall off the planet on July 3rd, like a lot of people think he was.
That
So-
whole
so-
thing,
so-
it's like to find out that he's like a lieutenant, like he's like retired lieutenant general, last of the army commanders to pass away
Yeah.
in the Civil War. But I was, you read about him and like, people will say to me, well, I don't know him past Gettysburg. What did he do? It's like, well, he went on to command an army. Like Ezra Church is his redemption. And I was reading a little bit more about that the other day. And, Sherman was very adamant that Hood and Stephen D. Lee were not going to attack. Like Sherman's like, why you weren't? Like, what are you doing? And Howard's like, no, Howard sensed that there was going to be an attack. But I think that goes back again to the type of like how Sherman was, that he couldn't always read the room in that way. And then the other anniversary that is today is Battle of Bentonville. And that's kind of like the pillow fight, right? Because they're kind of half-assing it because they know the end is near.
Well, they do, but I think it comes to a point. We talk about Franklin a lot, where it was a lot of savagery at the end, and this one, so when you talk about, Sherman being some kind of monster or war criminal, all this other stuff you hear all the time from certain Twitter pages who like to pretend they're different people who don't really exist anymore. They'll talk about they'll talk about what that is, but then you look into the reality was he knew he had Joseph Johnson over a barrel, and they still fought, but it could have been a lot. He could have really dicked on the dirt at him if he wanted to, and he just kind of took it slow. But I think he respected Johnson too, and I think that's a big part of it.
Oh, they had, and they never met in person until he had to go tell him like he was going to do the surrender, and he then on top of that all, he's having to tell him that Lincoln's been assassinated. The other part of Bentonville too is there are what is left of the Army of Tennessee is fighting there. So this broken army has now been split up. They've had to, kind of put away their battle flags, which is like a huge thing for morale when you have to do that. And I think that was tough too, but you think those men who fought at Franklin, who fought at Nashville have now been dragged, kind of to the other side. And it's kind of like, oh, here we go again. We're having to fight again.
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing too, is a lot of these guys, the generals, they knew when to hold them, knew when to fold them. And you knew that Johnston and Sherman, as they reached Bentonville in North Carolina, which is right around now.
Yeah, the anniversary today.
Yeah. So they knew that this thing was over. Let's just kind of deal with this and get through it, as opposed to earlier the previous year, Franklin, which it was much more savage. So they said that for the most part, the politicians are the ones who didn't know it was over. They didn't realize that the war was over yet, but the generals certainly did. The soldiers are going to do what they're going to do, contrary to what people think. Patrick Cleburne was not an independent contractor, savagely killing his own men for no reason. Sorry to break that to you, but soldiers do take orders, and even Cleburne had to take orders.
That was such a, oh my God, that whole thing was just, I was like, am I really this is what people believe, that he was participated voluntarily in the dumbest charge of the Civil War? He's a subordinate. If he says nope, he's going to get fucking court-martialed.
No, and someone like Patrick Cleburne, he was a soldier, and sometimes you knew when it was over. You knew this was going to be it. And sometimes you're surprised you lived. Like we talked a lot about Beauregard, Beauregard.
Yeah.
It's Shiloh, and he was writing after he did his victory dance. He found out that it was 28-3, and they came back on you. Mm-hmm. That maybe he was riding up front because he's like, well, I'm gonna win or die trying. My life ends here, and he survived it. So there comes a point when Cleburne likely knew that if he was going to charge Opdyke there for Franklin, that was going to be it for him. But he had no choice. That was his orders. You have to follow orders. And whether the orders are silly or not. I mean, you want to look at, you want to look at all those guys in Pickett's Charge.
Yeah.
I just don't mean Kemper and Armistead and Garnett, but Brockenbrough and Davis and Marshall and Fry and Lane and Lawrence and Trimble, all those guys, Wilcox, Lane, all of them, they have to do as ordered, whether you agree with it or not. That's the game. That's what you signed up for. So there's been a lot of revisionist history lately, I think.
Yes.
But you know what though? But it's been revisionist on both sides though, Mary, lately.
Oh,
too.
there's revisionist on both sides. I see that quite a bit, which Twitter is a cesspool for it right now. Like just this whole, I don't know, just talk about history.
Well, I think, there's always been a certain thing about a tribalism when it comes to a lot of this, right?
Yeah.
But I think you have to be able to separate, the whites from the yolk here sometimes with these things. And there's been a lot of stuff that's been said. And this is all, what's interesting is a lot of this is new. This is pulling the scabs off again.
Yep.
From a lot of the stuff was settled. And if you read the stuff from Gordon's bio, or you read a lot of Robert E. Lee's late life stuff, the stuff he did, they're trying to mend these fences. There are people now on both sides who are just trying to rip the fences down again.
Oh, that's how it really seems. And I kind of, I get it. Like there's stuff out there that is simply not true, or it's misconstrued, it's revisionist, whatever. But at the same time, like you think that somebody like, and I know it was a different time, but somebody like Joshua Chamberlain can have Gordon over to his house and have dinner. They probably didn't talk politics, but they got together to talk about the war and to share the stories and keep them alive, and keep those stories alive. And that's what we have to do now is keep the stories of these, not just the generals, but the men, the boys that fought,
how are you supposed to learn the Civil War and just study one side and pretend that your side is the only side that exists, right?
Yeah.
And like we said this before, you want to learn, if you're a Union guy and you want to learn about the Union, study the Confederacy and vice versa, because you need to learn the mindset and you have to learn what was being done and said at the same time. If you want to sit back and point the fingers at everybody because somebody likes Patrick Cleburne or somebody likes William Sherman, well, I would suggest that you're not really a historian. You're a fan, right? You're a fan.
Yeah, if you get bent out of shape over who somebody likes, and just judge them for it, that is really bad. And I see a lot of that happening again for some reason. And the thing is like, people aren't gonna want to talk about it. People aren't gonna want to study it because they're gonna think, geez, I'm gonna get judged if I study Sherman or if I study Claiborne or, I study Howard and I see it a lot. Oh, Howard, or, oh, he ran, and just, the whole experience I had at the Chamberlain house with that guy, where he's like interrupting me as I was trying to ask a legitimate question and get an answer. And this guy is like, talking over me saying, oh, Howard, he ran, blah, blah, blah. And then.
Well, that's the thing too, is, if you're a Union guy and you read Reminiscences by John Brown Gordon, yes, it's going to make you itchy because it's uncomfortable, but that's kind of what history is anyway, is learning the dark corners. But you'll learn about you'll learn a lot about what the people at the time thought.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you agree with it, but you gotta learn it. I mean, but we're talking about this because it seems like all of a sudden again, it's kind of, and we've seen it. But the difference is though, is you're seeing it a lot now from the northern people.
Yes.
Right. Where, how could you possibly study Claiborne? How could you possibly study Jackson? Don't you know that blah, blah, blah. And it's almost like shaming.
Yep, it is. It's shaming and it's terrible. And it's okay that, these guys were human and it's okay to see them as that way. And I think there's not everybody on here does this, or nobody does this on here that comes on here. But I see it where it's like they are scared to look at the other side because, and I think part of it goes back, like they might start to see these guys as human. That might start to see aspects of Gordon's personality that are like, wow, he was, he's leaving Richmond and what the number one thing on his mind is not the war, it's his wife. who is sick, and he's
It's-
worried.
For most of these guys, their job was to survive the day, whether it be in camp and the sickness and all this shit going on around. And then battles happened. There was never, read Elijah Hunt Rhodes' diary. Read the Company H diary, by Sam Watkins. And most of the diaries talk about them sitting around in camp whittling all day.
Yep.
And it may sound like, who the hell wants to read this shit? But it's important because it gives you an insight into what was going on in their head at the time. And this concept that, how could you possibly have retreated from, the flank at Chancellorsville because they should have known that so-and-so. You'll find out by reading, Abner Small, that these dudes had no clue what was going on 10 feet from them.
They didn't know. It was like, every story is different because they didn't know. And MJ and Charles both say that, like, they agree with what you're saying about, kind of how things are. MJ mentions a true balanced and objective historian must study and know both sides, and that's absolutely true. I'll
admit when a younger Darren was very, very just causey. I was very, but then I remember one time some guy in Gettysburg was all getting in my shit, Mary, calling me Lincoln was a tyrant and all this stuff. And I remember being all mad about it. But now I'm like, whatever. I'm like, if that's what you think, but something, what's interesting about that was whether I agree with them or don't agree with them, I can now appreciate the fact that he thinks that for some reason, and maybe I should study why he thinks that.
Yeah.
To get a better idea. Of what the mindset is. And like we said before, have any opinion you want. If you want to believe the sky is green, knock yourself out. But as long as be informed by it, and as you study these guys, you learn that the more you study them, they've all got flaws, they've all got positives. They're all family, God-fearing people in the Victorian age. Every single one of them. They fought for whatever the hell they fought in. But if you study them, it gives you that full 360-degree mindset of what this whole thing's about. And it gives you a better appreciation for it. You don't gotta like it, but you gotta learn it. If you're going to really learn this stuff and you really want to have these really good bar conversations, or if you ever want to work in history someday, you better learn there are two sides on the fields. Yeah. Because the Civil War would have been pretty lame if it was just the Union or just the Confederacy. Would have been.
There are two sides that need to be studied. Right. MJ says, I think many are afraid to learn more about these individuals of our history as they may find something in themselves relatable to them, whether it's North or South. Ian's on here, and I think he's from England.
Yeah, very cool.
Very cool. Awesome. Welcome, Ian. His story's late. No, don't worry. People pop in and out of here all the time.
Probably a big Fremantle fan, Mary.
Fremantle wrote about Cleveland.
From the elite Coldstream Guards.
Elsie, how dare you speak of someone else in the sacred halls of Chamberlain?
Well, the thing about it too, though, in all seriousness, is when you study people here, this is the ultimate preach to the converted here. Okay, well, not exactly, but if you can learn more about your own side. Yeah. So, and I think one of the good things about the movie Gettysburg, it's also the bad thing about the movie Gettysburg, is it gives you the impression, as he mentions Chamberlain here, someone mentions Chamberlain, that there is no doubt that what happened on Little Round Top, is a must-have, must-win at that moment for the Confederacy. Now, admittedly, as you really study the battle, you know that the horse was already out of the barn. The echelon attack had already moved on. So if William C. Oates and Bulger had got up there, they'd be like Ambrose Wright at the day before. They'd be like, "Where is everybody?" And they would eventually got pushed off. But at the time, it was important. But the movie makes it look like it was the only thing that happened. Yeah. And even in the movie, even in the Ken Burns documentary, he says a professor from Maine, took a small hill in Pennsylvania and saved that battle and maybe saved the entire Union. Yeah. I mean, that's hyperbole with a capital H, right? Oh yeah. But it doesn't demean him. No. It doesn't mean you can't study the 78th and the 102nd New York up at Culp's Hill, and the 137th at Culp's Hill, and realize what George Sears Green did, and how Geary fucked that up, by the way. But anyway, but it is what it is. But you can understand, and if you're doing it right, you'll take that movie and you'll expand it, and you'll learn that there are other parts of the battlefield. There was a day one that didn't involve just Buford.
Yep.
There was a day three that didn't involve just Pickett and Armistead and an old Low and old Winnie Boy, right? But so I mean, East Calvary Field is a great study.
Yeah.
You want to study David Mercury Gregg, and you want to study Custer and a lot of these people. But if you study East Calvary Field, you're going to learn about Breckenhoff Ridge, and you're going to learn about these other places that set that up too. And that's why it's so cool to find your love in that movie, but expand it. But don't just see it and go to you and say, well, I saw the movie. I know.
Yeah, that was great. When I mentioned, like I said to the guy, I'm like, you do know that he was talking about how Hancock had come in to save the day. And I'm like, I'm not denying that. I said, I don't know if I would say that he saved the day. I think Howard had just as much of a hand in it as Hancock did. And I think Howard needs more credit. And he's like, oh, Howard was a shit show coming out. I'm like, and then I said, well, you do know that Slocum eventually was in charge on the field, right? And he just kind of looked at me like this, who the fuck is Slocum? And then he's like, I've seen the movie. And I'm like, we're done. Like, hey, good morning, Frank. Frank's on from California.
Yeah. Good morning, Frank. It's early over there. Frank got up early with us. Frank will be going to Gettysburg here in July. I you know this. We'll be seeing Frank at Gettysburg. Yeah. But I guess the whole point is like anything else. And this is not rocket science. The more you study, the more you're going to learn, and the more you're going to expose stuff to yourself. And maybe, just maybe, you'll think something you thought was wrong.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I used to be very like Just Cause and very like.
You were a big Sherman girl. I remember.
Yeah, I was big into Sherman too. But the more I studied him, the more I was like, you know what? He's kind of, he's good, but he's kind of overrated. And I find Howard far more fascinating of a study, just because and Howard too does not have that voice in history. His last biography came out in the 1950s or 60s, and it's a good biography. But the Civil War is only 70 pages. The rest of it is his time in the Freedmen's Bureau, because, you think about it, the Civil War is just like, that's only 4 or 5 years of his life. And then that ends in 65. He lives until 1909.
Just think about it for a second. I was thinking about this the other day. This little podcast thing we do is 2 years old, right? About
almost 3.
Okay, almost 3. Yeah. That's almost as long as the Civil War lasted.
Yeah.
Think about it. So, 4 years is not that long, but people, we talk about it because I think it's the most important 4 years in American history. Admittedly, I'm biased, but I tell my Rev War friends here in Boston that, it's great. You can have all the declarations you want, but until you prove it, it doesn't really matter. And it's not true. Well, okay, whatever. But that's how it is.
MJ says, I'm a Hancock guru and I give a lot of credit to Howard. Yeah, MJ and I have talked a lot about the whole myth behind Hancock and Howard, like fighting it out on East Cemetery Hill, which is
I was expecting an RKO situation between you two. That never happened at Gettysburg. We were there last month. So when we're there in July, we'll have to see what happens. Maybe we can see if we can get like an octagon set up over there in front of the statue, let you guys go at it. In this corner, Labatt's Blue. In this corner, Maker's Mark. That's what we'll do.
Mike mentions that Longstreet at Gettysburg is a good book, and I just asked him, is that the one by Corey Farr? I think it is.
Yeah, we talked to Corey, and the thing about that book is, well, how can I say this? It's very capital L Longstreet, where Corey does his work, he does his homework. But if you really want to study, what's an interesting study if you get into it is look at that Lee versus Longstreet thing. Yep. When you have guys like Marshall talk about the mentality of what was going on at the time. There's a historian named Bob Crick who has a good book about that whole thing. I can't remember the name of what the book is, but he talks about that because I find if you're on the Confederate side or even the Union side for that matter, although more people I know in the North are Confederate fans than Union fans, I think, by the way. But you'll find that there's like a 50-50 Longstreet Lee split. Maybe it's skewed. It kind of goes like this in time. It's like a stock market. But when you study them and you find out the mentality of what that is, Longstreat, if you read a lot of the sources, Longstreet definitely takes his ball and goes home mentally on certain parts of it. He does. Yeah. And what was the fascinating thing about that was when Longstreet was setting McLaws up and they were talking about when they were sitting there trying to pin out where they were going to go. Yeah. Longstreet says to McLaws, I want you here along, basically kind of what the Peach Orchard is now. Yeah. And Longstreet goes, no, I want you here. And from that point on, Longstreet pouts, and he assumes for the rest of the battle that McLaws is reporting directly to Lee. And so, he was promised that front of line on the march on his fun run that went all through Pennsylvania, right?
Hessler loved it when you called it that when we had him on.
But that's kind of what it is, though. But there's a reason why when you get to Breams Hill, they instead of turning everyone around in that small little road, they did like a snake so he could stay in front, and that must have taken all day. And that's a big part of it. Whereas he didn't take control of that situation and just have everybody just turn and go back the other way. Of course, why they didn't chase Alexander's, his artillery and go around the hills, we'll never know. But there's a lot of he said, she said, and a lot of stuff going on. And I think it all goes back. I don't think it's anything more than Longstreet assumed when Jackson died that he was going to be the right-hand man. And Lee made it very clear to him at Gettysburg that you're still a subordinate.
Yeah.
And I don't think he liked that too much. And I think
I don't think he did. I don't think he did either. And MJ mentions that there is some myth behind that issue. My opinion is I think there was there probably was an issue, but maybe it's not maybe it's like the Howard Hancock thing. It's a little bit overblown at times. But MJ mentions that Longstreet named one of his kids after Lee.
Yeah. I mean, Lee was still a god, but I think there's a reason why Longstreet wanted to go west and fight with Bragg. He wanted that army. I think Longstreet went out west and he thought, okay, I can work it.
But the thing with Longstreet is I don't think he was he's not as well known by Davis, right? And Davis is a guy that puts his friends in charge. There's no way Davis is going to put Longstreet in charge of that army.
No.
You look at how Hood came to be in charge of Army of Tennessee. Like Army of Tennessee is a fascinating study. The book by, I can't remember the guy's name, about Army of Tennessee is so good. And he does such a good job of setting up how screwed up the army was from the very beginning, especially compared to something like the AOP, where you have people that have positions of power that have put in place because they're friends with somebody and they know somebody, and the people that should have had those positions are lower down and they don't have the power to say anything. And that was the pattern with Army of Tennessee. So you have Hood, when he's recovering from his injury at Chickamauga, he is writing to Davis, working behind the scenes to get put in charge. He's backstabbing Joseph E. Johnston as well, even though he's telling Johnson to do some of the stuff. Like he's saying, well, I think we should do this. And Johnson's like, okay. He works it so that he becomes in charge. And that's like Davis, that was the huge fault of Davis, is putting those people in charge. I mean, I think Longstreet would have been a great commander of Army of Tennessee.
Well, he was somebody, like, you think like a football analogy, you're a really good coordinator.
Yeah.
You want to be a head coach, right? And that's what it was. I think a lot of the Lee Longstreet stuff is contrived by the Lee people and the Longstreet people after the war, especially after Lee died. And there's a lot of animosity towards Longstreet because he was big into the Reconstruction. He was on U.S. Grant's campaign. There was a lot of people like Jubal Early thought he was a sellout. So there's a lot of that too. But I think there's a book called, I think it's called like July 2nd at Gettysburg. I forget the name of the book. These books all blended after a while. That really kind of gives an honest balance of it. And Longstreet really felt that his plan was the best plan. He was under that impression that was the mindset. But that sometimes circumstances change. And I think Longstreet's guilty of not realizing that's, sometimes you have to alter your plan instead of sticking with it.
Yeah.
And I think he realized that he was still an advisor. That's always going to be the interesting thing about them. But it wasn't like they hated each other. No. I think they both, in the heat of battle, felt that there was a couple different ways to skin a cat. And then Lee reminded Longstreet that he was the boss.
Yep. I think that happened. I think that probably happened a lot. There's a lot of different rivalries that in the Civil War, in the Eastern Theater and the Western Theater. Speaking of Western Theater, our trivia champ Leonard is on here.
We should just make it a permanent category for him.
Leonard Curtis round.
I'm not gonna lie. I went out of my way to make these questions hard this time.
Leonard won.
And then Leonard goes on, and it's like playing ball with Tom Brady. It's like, God damn it! At the end of the day,
it's awesome though. I mean, he knows his stuff. Everybody.
He does. But what's great about it was and then Jacob from History Book, he did a category for us, and he did a good time with that. But congratulations for all the winners there, because
Oh yeah, Autumn won, and she'd never been on before, and she won. She's
so
really,
you definitely you earned your book this time. It was fun because I got to know the boss here let me do all the questions this time. There wasn't, on a scale of 0 to 10, how awesome is Howard? The answer is 10. There wasn't questions like that. They were they were trying to make them hard. But those things are a lot of fun though. And we invited Wayne to join us, but he didn't want. He needed to go to bed. It was a long night for him. But that would have been hilarious how he would have done. He probably didn't want to get stumped by Leonard. That's probably why.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the. Well, Leonard's out there in Vicksburg too, which we have to get out there to see sometime.
No, and we have Tim Smith on, Western Tim Smith.
Yes.
To talk about the real horse soldiers, and we talk about Grierson. We talk about that fantastic campaign with Vicksburg and all the stops and starts with Grant. It was 6 times. 6 times, and a lot of failures, but he kept going at it. And Sherman, he's like, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing this, maybe, but you got to do it. But the raid of Grierson was brilliant, because when you find out the way he did that, you have one set of cavalry going east, one going west to draw the Confederates out, create that sweet spot in the middle, and the Grierson was right down the middle. Yeah. Right. And then it was a mess, and he's fighting old poor John C. Pemberton, who got his ass shipped out there. Why? Because of Robert Smalls, Because of Robert Smalls. That's why he was out there. So it's a small role with this.
Pemberton was a mess.
Pemberton, I don't know. I mean, he was a Pennsylvania guy who fought for the Confederacy. He's kind of like the opposite of Thomas, but Philly, that whole thing. But he I don't think he was a mess, but he got completely rope-a-doped. He got played. Don't forget too, you're stuck in the middle. If you, no matter how long you can withstand a siege, eventually you're going to have to give up the ghost here, and that's what he did. But he did a pretty good job for the most part when he was down in South Carolina. But the planter escaping and losing all the guns, that was his undoing. And his boss, Robert E. Lee, didn't like that too much.
No, that was. I was going to say, speaking of the Western Theater of Vicksburg, and you talking about Grierson's raid, our next book club is in April, and Tim Smith is going to be joining us for that. So it is The Real Horse Soldiers by Tim Smith.
So I would imagine that Leonard is there with bells on for this one, because this is his jam. We're talking Vicksburg, we're talking about Grierson's raid. So, and we've done a handful of cavalry on both sides. We did the one on Mosby. Obviously John Hunt Morgan, but there's a lot of good stories with this. But this one's probably the king as far as true successful campaigns. And when Grant landed at Bruinsburg, it was the largest amphibious landing in U.S. history up until D-Day. That's how big this was. We're not talking about the SS Minnow pulling up to the island, Mary. Okay, this is a gigantic thing they did, and how hard it was. You try to make the Decatur cut, try to get around that, and then you finally have to run the gauntlet, and you're trying all these rope-a-dopes and all these different changes, the angles. But give Grant credit. People can rip on Grant for all this, the drinking, all that stupid stuff they rip him on for, but that Vicksburg campaign at the end of the day was about as brilliant as you're going to get. To this day, no question.
Yeah, it's like, so Vicksburg is such a fascinating study. And I mean, I really I always wanted to learn about it. And then I read Donald L. Miller's just a 1-volume book about Vicksburg. I want to read Tim Smith someday. When I'm done grad school, I want to read what Tim Smith has written about it. But Donald L. Miller is excellent for just that 1 volume. And he puts so much detail in it, but it's not, you don't get bogged down in the details, and he tells a story about it. It's so interesting. Frank mentions the further west you go, the poorer the leadership. So it makes sense why the commanders of the New Mexico campaign are the way they are.
The glory of the past.
Like the worse you are, the further west you go. It's like, you get shipped out to the island of misfit toys, which is the Western Theater. But then again, you look at somebody like Howard and Slocum that go out there. Howard especially is an incredible, 1864. Howard?
Well, I don't know how true that is, though. You keep saying Claiborne is the best the Confederates had. Pretty sure he was out west.
Yeah, no, Claiborne is, yeah.
Pretty sure
Claiborne's
Grant was
up
out west. He
Yeah.
was, right?
Yeah. But no, I'm just saying, like, there are some really bad commanders. Like, you look at Henry and Donaldson early in the war, those guys that are charged with commanding that from the Confederacy.
No,
And then one guy was going to get arrested, so he leaves.
Oh, there was a whole
Secretary of War.
You had the good, the bad, and the ugly on both. You
Yeah.
had Ledley at the Crater. You had a whole bunch. You had a lot of shit shows with the stuff.
Yeah.
But again, not everybody's Hancock. Not everybody's Grant. Not everybody's Jackson. You just have to take the good with the bad. But yeah, Glorieta Pass, the Gettysburg of the West. That's a fun battle to look into.
Yeah, we need to do that. Frank mentions that's what got him into the Civil War was Glorieta Pass.
Really?
Yeah, that's really cool. He said because of the film, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly.
Oh yeah.
That's really cool. I admittedly do not know a lot about Glorieta Pass. I would love to study it more. I mean, I like studying like Wilson's Creek, and what was the other one? Was it Pea Ridge?
Pea Ridge, yeah, Arkansas.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
a good
with
one.
Franz Siegel. Like
that's you had Alexander, you had Pike, and you had Albert Pike. You had with the Indian Brigade, and the scalping the Union guys, and oh my God, you want to talk about brutal hand-to-hand combat? Study Pea Ridge, and Franz Siegel. He that was his best day. Yeah,
it was all downhill after that with it.
Yeah.
My comments are giving me an error. I can't post for some reason. It's YouTube. But yeah, I think the Western theater, I mean, I will always be more of a Western theater person because I just find it so fascinating. I find the characters out there a little bit more, I mean, they're interesting in the Eastern theater, but the Eastern theater is more like the glitz and the glam. And the Western theater is that kind of, you have the real characters out there, I think. Like that's just
that's kind of the grunt work. That's the offensive line out there. They're the ones who do a lot of the work and don't get a lot of the credit. Yeah. And I don't think it's it's a bad thing to say that the war was won out west, because it really was. But again, the closer you get to Washington, the closer you get to Richmond. Yeah. That's where the spotlight's going to be. You don't have the 5G out there, internet passing information back and forth. Everything that happened in Washington, around Washington, was obviously going to be who's going to have a spotlight put on it. Yeah, no question. Unless it's Monocacy and no one seems to care, which is kind of weird, but that's okay.
No, I love Monocacy is one of those ones that we were talking with our friend Andrea Quinn the other day on St. Patrick's Day. We got to meet her and hang out with her. And someone says study Centralia, Missouri for just the brutality, just atrocious. LC he calls Siegel Franz Smeagol from Lord of the Rings. We were talking about Monocacy and how important that battle was. MJ mentions Team Rosecrans from Western Theater, absolutely. Rosecrans, and I think in the Eastern Theater, one of the more important battles that doesn't get looked at enough is Monocacy, and I think the Western Theater, it is definitely like either Stones River or the whole Tullahoma campaign.
Well, that's the whole thing, is you're not going to read a lot of glowing reports about Tullahoma Springs and the Grant memoirs, right? No. But you're gonna have to pick and choose what you want. But there are some really good ones out there, and the sheer brutality. I mean, you could look at the battles, the big battles. There are specific parts of the battle. You want to talk about absolute brutality in the American Civil War in Gettysburg that no one studies. Go study the Arkansas guys up against Wheeler at the 20th Indiana. Yeah. Go there, because that was, you want to talk about brutal hand-to-hand combat of, people talk about the wheat field, they talk about the peach orchard. Go there where no one goes. Go walk behind it this time of year and go, walk up those where Manning's guys came up, right? And where Wheeler's guys, he got shot right in the head, right in the temple, killed instantly. The rock behind is where his body was. But that's brutal. Triangular field, everyone talks about Van Horn Ellis, but go walk down the line a little bit and go check out Wheeler, because there's even the big battles where everybody thinks about the cornfield and Antietam and things like that, but study the West Woods, right? Where your boy Howard was.
Yep. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and that's brutal. And there's there's a few battles on the Atlanta campaign that are really brutal. I know that like Howard talks about them quite a bit. At Ezra Church. And I was reading about that one again the other day. It's a brutal battle. Like there's I don't know, somebody calculated the amount of bullets that were being fired per minute. And it was just like, people like tend to say like, oh, Howard had it easy because he was fighting against SD Lee and he was a shit show. It's like, well, yeah, SD Lee was, but those Union guys, especially Blackjack's guys, fought really hard at Ezra. And it was a brutal battle for them. And it was a win that they needed. You know, and that's when, you know, they didn't take Atlanta, but it got them a step closer to it. You know, and a lot of those guys that had fought at Gettysburg, they went back to say like, holy shit, things in the Western Theater are way different, you know.
Well, I don't want to say it's more savage, but I mean, you certainly, you know, you want to read up on savagery, like I said before, read up on Albert Pike's Indian Brigade.
Yeah, that's
right.
Pea Ridge, right?
The Pea Ridge, but you find just about these are guys that after they beat the Union, they scalped them and chopped them up, and I mean, just it's hard to imagine people doing that to each other. Mm-hmm. But there's a whole bunch of them. You can look at Jenkins Ferry, for example. You can look at any of these and just. That's why you pick your battle and you study it and you learn it, and you may go to one of these smaller battles and just see and just it resonates with you. Now, not just the big boys, but I mean the big boys are important too. But you realize that the big boys are the result of the little ones. Yeah,
each leads into one. It's kind of like you can't look at them in silos. You have to look at how they're all connected. MJ says, I likely would not have read about Tullahoma campaign until I had to study it for my living history persona. So Pauline Cushman, plus in following your podcast made me want to learn more about the West. Yeah, and me doing this podcast made me learn more about the East. Like because of this, I went into this podcast not a fan of McClellan. I like McClellan now. I mean, McClellan is a lot of things. I mean, he did himself no favors with what he wrote. He was not the best commander of the AOP, but I think he gets a lot of scapegoating happens with him. And in studying him more for the podcast, I've come to have an appreciation for what he did and what he had to do.
I mean, there's no denying the fact that he was at Bull Run. He saw the Union Army wasn't ready to fight. He spent a lot of time preparing and training and building that foundation of the Army. Mm-hmm. You know, the Army that Meade got was the result of the effort that McClellan put in.
And now, Mac, too.
Right, but they all built on each other. Yeah. But McClellan did make his mistakes, and his mistakes were political for the most part. Yeah. You know, Jamestown was not a good moment for him. There's no question about that. Magruder pantsed him hard, but he was cautious, but he wanted to fight in the right situation. It's not his fault that Irvin McDowell's division was taken from him to the peninsula without him knowing it by Lincoln to go check. That's not his fault. He did fall back. I mean, the 7 days was not a good result for him, but they were playing on their heels that entire time. But he did get away though. Mm-hmm. They did live to fight another day. Yeah. You can't blame him for Antietam for chasing Lee. No, and you absolutely cannot. You have to give him credit for the Maryland campaign because he did it. And you have to look beyond the Stephen Sears bullshit about the Order 191 and study the reality of it. Because Antietam was a must win. You're coming off of Second Manassas. You're coming off of this juggernaut of Lee's army, which was on a heater, and you're able to push them back. And it was brutal, and it was a 51-49% victory. You know, it was a shootout hockey victory, really what it was. But there's no denying the fact that he did it. Yeah. And John Pope got astroglided against the same army. Okay, and so now he's going to sit there and fight now and push them back. Yeah. It's not his fault that he's going to go now with no supplies into Virginia heading into wintertime.
I would not like that. And I mean, I get that decision and how we came to that conclusion, and again, this is just opinion and this is reading the sources, is that if you look at what somebody like George Meade is writing to his wife, he's saying, we don't have any supplies. We don't have any food. We can't feed our horses. It's terrible. Meade is saying that. Soldiers are saying that too. McClellan's in a very similar situation to what Meade would be at Gettysburg in July of 1863, where his army is tired and you can't just go after, because it's like, I guess like following a wounded lion.
Well, and
the lion can still fight.
It's not exactly a long distance to get supplies from the DC area to Sharpsburg, Maryland. You're not talking about across the country. But again, you have a lot of times these generals have to take the responsibility of the mistakes made by Washington. We saw with Burnside with the pontoon boats, which Burnside gets, he gets a lot of shit for Fredericksburg.
Yeah.
But if those pontoons got there when they were supposed to, and they got across the river before the Confederates got to Marye's Heights, that's a different battle. Yeah. It's not his fault. Now, we go back to the orders. How much flexibility did he have to not go over and try to push them back to get through Fredericksburg and advance back to Richmond? Because at this part of the battle, they were still trying to get to Richmond.
Yeah.
And so
not enough DQs, no supplies. I think that was specifically said in our Fredericksburg episode too.
Don't deny the lack of DQ factor. I mean, especially when you get in those summer months, Mary. You hold those upside down, they don't fall out. That soldiers talk about that, how important that was. But for real though, you there's a lot of red tape that is part of this. And unfortunately, Lincoln doesn't get blamed for it, right? Who gets blamed for it? The generals. Yeah. Exactly. And it's not to peel over Lincoln either.
No, but I mean, he has to shoulder some of this blame too. I mean, he's a president that is juggling a lot. He does well for the most part, but early in the war, especially, he's kind of like, he's the one that some of this blame needs to fall on him. And that is not a slight on his part. That is not bashing him. That is saying like, it's unfair to take it off of him and put it on somebody like McClellan, put it on somebody like Burnside. Everybody made the mistakes.
No, if you're gonna pass out slices of the blame pie, you're gonna slice that up, okay? Lincoln is gonna get a couple of slices of that.
Yeah.
Now, and again, but again, we're doing what historians are guilty of doing is we're looking back to this 160-year-old looking glass here.
Yeah.
Lincoln in real time was getting all this conflicted information. Darius Couch from Pennsylvania, for example, right?
Yeah.
Andrew Curtin from Pennsylvania made it sound like there were aliens from Mars landing to fight for the Confederacy across the border. And Lincoln's like, oh shit, I better get on this.
I just pictured that from Mars attacks.
Right. But he was getting a lot of intel. So when you look at Maryland, they had 1 billion soldiers fighting for the Confederacy per Lincoln. So that a lot of it's intelligence, and he has to fall in what he believes, what he fears, because his goal is to protect Washington at the entire time. But again, you're going by intel and bad communication. Mm-hmm. This entire war is bad terrain, bad communication, bad weather. That's the whole thing. Those are the big three.
Elsie mentions McClellan managed to put Lee on defense. There should be some credit for making Lee not the aggressor in the invasion that McClellan set up.
Yeah, and he did that. Mm-hmm. And that's why when you get you want to beat a good sports team, football, baseball, especially football, take away what they do best. Take the offensive team, make them play defense. Keep the good quarterback on the sideline as long as you can, right? And that's what McClellan did. And he doesn't get enough credit for that. And that's where people like Hooker went wrong. Hooker was the Dick LeBeau of the NFL, the old Steeler defensive coordinator. We do what we do, right? Yeah. He didn't realize that you have to gauge the situation, your battle plan on who you're fighting. Meade knew that well. He knew the best course of action at Gettysburg was to fight defense, whereas Hooker probably would have fought offensively, and he would have got pantsed. He would have got pantsed by Lee Howard if he did that. Yeah. Battle of Gettysburg, if there was a Battle of Gettysburg, would have been a different story.
Yes.
So you have to be able to look at the game plan and realize who you're fighting, what their strengths are, how to take away their strengths.
Oh yeah.
And kind of manipulate the situation. The good generals did that. Sherman did that. Grant did that. Meade did that. And then who didn't do that was guys like Hood, guys like Hooker, right?
No, and Hood did not do that. Hood went we talked a lot about Franklin just because of some of the takes we've seen of it recently on Twitter. And, one of the things I kind of thought when I read some of this shit about Franklin was like, okay, well, if you're going to use the logic that Claiborne voluntarily participated in the stupidest charge of the Civil War, you could put that logic back on, somebody like, say, Joseph Hooker at Fredericksburg. Say he was stupid for letting his men try to take Marye's Heights. He's following an order. Hooker knew how bad it was. And Hooker had to do the math because there was a certain equation they would work out that when they lost a certain number of guys, that's when they pulled back. And that's what Hooker had to do. I can't imagine being in that position. So, I mean, I don't think Claiborne was stupid, and I don't think Hooker was stupid. They were following orders, you know?
Well, none of these guys were stupid. These guys
No.
got to where they were based on who they were.
Yeah.
And Hood wasn't stupid, and Burnside wasn't stupid.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Um,
Hood was kind of, oh
No,
yeah,
but
yeah,
I-
Hood was.
I
Hood
mean,
was not
these
stupid,
these guys, these guys. I mean, as far as battle tacticians, I mean,
Mhm.
look at Hood at Chickamauga. Look at Hood at
Oh, yeah.
Gettysburg. The Hood's injury at Gettysburg is one of the more underrated, huge changes, domino butterfly effects. You know,
Yeah.
when you get Evander Laws sitting up Big Round Top, he doesn't know he's in charge now.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is a complete cluster. And that's the most important part, the beginning of that domino attack up the Emmitsburg Road, right? So when you take out at the beginning and you're already starting late because of the Longstreet march there, how it changes. But losing him was huge. But again, Hood was the right guy at the right time at that moment.
Yep.
Evander Law wasn't.
No,
Right.
that's the thing is like, and that injury for Hood is kind of sets the ball rolling on, because that injury really affected him badly.
Yeah.
And so did his injury at Chickamauga. And it definitely, I mean, I don't think he was addicted to Laundrum at the time of Franklin, but I think knowing what we know now about opioids, there was probably some lingering effects, but probably his injury was not doing him any favors when it came to being able to command. You saw that at Ezra Church. He couldn't even ride out to see Stephen D. Lee's position. He stayed back.
No.
You know, and it's like Hood is just one of those guys that should not have been in command at all. And I mean, I don't mind Hood. He's not my favorite.
No, Hood was someone who petitioned for the position. He wanted the position.
Yeah.
He really campaigned hard with to Davis for the position. But again, at the time, you just lose Atlanta and you're pissed about that. And
Mhm.
you're Jeff Davis. You want to push, you want to get rid of Sherman, you want to get rid of all those guys. You are going to put an aggressive guy in. History will tell him that that was the wrong call, but it's not hard to look into the mindset and try to figure that out. If you are looking for an aggressive fembot who just knows how to fight, he's your guy.
That is an image I did not need as good as a fembot.
But then he's just a go guy, a killer. That's who he was. He was not a thinking man's general. He was a fighting man's general.
And that's why he's so good at Chickamauga, which I think is one of Hood's best days in the Civil War. Is that's not, yes, he's one of Longstreet's guys, but it is Hood that he's the one, he's like, oh, there's a hole here, we're gonna go through it when the breakthrough happens. And Hood was able to, I think, rally his men. Like he had that kind, like he's aggressive. So he's able to do the breakthrough, you know, and just, it's him leading it. But then he gets that horrific injury and loses his leg and he's got to go recover. And he probably came back a little bit too soon, maybe, who knows? But I think like the whole breakthrough at Chickamauga is one of those game changers in the Civil War, which comes down to somebody writing an order and not understanding where they are in the field.
Well, that was also 8 brigades, so we're talking about a lot of guys. I mean, let's be honest. That was like D-Day for Chickamauga. You send all those guys. What was it, like 12,000 guys? Right up the Savannah of that line, right there, right. And you have, of course, you have all those you know, a lot of people get shit on Thomas Woods pulling out. He doesn't want to, and there's a lot of
ordered, and he has no choice because he had been dressed down earlier by Rosecrans.
Right,
and men are like, you got to do this, or you're going to get court-martialed.
There's a lot of it like, okay, if you say so, I'll be back here, and that's not unique to that's the whole damn thing. But you can see when you clear up the middle and you send 8 brigades of these Texans, these people going right at you. And that's why Snodgrass is important, why George Thomas is important. He was able to slow the roll of those Confederates and let the Union and Rosecrans get back to Chattanooga.
And that was the important thing, I think, is Chattanooga or Chickamauga is a victory for the Confederates. But at the end of the day, the Union Army is sitting in the city that they need, Chattanooga. And that city at the time was the most important one in the Confederacy to Abraham Lincoln. It was not Richmond, it was Chattanooga. Because if you can start cutting off supplies from Chattanooga, you're going to slowly start bleeding Lee's army, and you're going to be able to get into where you need, which your next big city is Atlanta.
You know what's so funny? What you made me think about this? You're talking about you talk about Hood. He was in the same after the injury. And you probably said the same thing about Hancock too.
That's what MJ just said that. She
right.
said similar to him.
But you know who got stronger as he got wounded more was Gordon. Right.
Yeah.
Now this is a guy he in charge of the 6th Alabama, the Raccoon Roughs they call them, and he's fighting over there at Seven Pines. That we call the Battle of 8 Pines, where your boy lost his arm. Right.
Yep.
He is standing there. At that point in the war, he could stand in a hailstorm and not get hit.
No.
That's how lucky that Gordon was. He was right up front with the 6th Alabama. This guy's getting shot left and right all around. His brother's getting shot. He doesn't get a scratch. Then he goes to Antietam. He ends up with a pincushion, right? He gets shot in the face, gets shot everywhere. But he recovers and comes back, and he's going to continually take that, and it galvanizes him.
Yeah.
You can say the same way even Chamberlain, for that matter.
Oh, yeah. He gets his Chamberlain's wounds are horrific. The other one, too, he had wounds going into the Civil War as Patrick Cleburne. He nearly died in a gunfight because he got shot. It went through his lung or something.
He got shot in the face of Cedar Creek, right?
Yeah, or Richmond.
That's right.
Richmond. So he comes in, into the Civil War having been shot in the lung. And they say it's not, I've read some sources that kind of like in a way like weakened him a little bit somehow. I don't know. He never fully recovered from that, but I don't know. He seems pretty good. But then Richmond, he gets shot in the face, and he's like trying to stay on command of the field, and his men.
Can you imagine going to work, getting shot in the face at work, and then going back to that job?
Oh my God.
That's a tough DQ right there for you, Mary.
Yeah. Frank said John missed but to scratch Gordon.
But Gordon was like that football player who's playing with the broken knees and smashed fingers and throat, but he went to that's where he was. And this isn't against the people we mentioned. This is no slight on Chamberlain or Hancock or any of these guys or Hood. But I mean, there's a reality to this. That you have a physical mortality you're looking at, and I'll give Hancock credit for that because he does get pants at Reeves Station, but everyone has their bad days.
Yeah.
Speaking of the DQ though, Mary, you got to talk about Hancock. No offense, MJ, but that's the reality. Was these guys put themselves in that situation, and not to like minimize like today's military. Most of these generals now sit in Florida and watch battles on the TV. These guys are right up front, all of them.
War has changed a lot, and it's not minimizing what the guys do to change today. But Mike mentions anyone who loses an arm and comes back to the Army is a badass in my book. You look at someone like Howard who lost his arm when was Seven Pines? That was April.
Well, Howard thought it was going to grow back. That's why he came back.
But he came back for Antietam. He was back pretty quickly.
Well, there's that great story when he loses the arm and then Kearney loses the other arm.
Yeah.
And they both say, and they basically both say, now we can go glove shopping together and save money and all that stuff. But that's the reality with this and for all the soldiers, the generals who got shot, these poor soldiers. I mean, the generals aren't the ones who are lying on the field screaming, crying in the middle of the night. It's a slaughter pen either. So, it's a miserable existence with this. Yeah. That's why when you look at both sides, that's what they had to deal with. Whatever the hell individually in their heads they were fighting for, you got to appreciate the effort. You do. You just have to, and that's the reality. These guys were a different breed. They really were.
Oh yeah, you read some of the memoirs, and they do write quite vividly about the experiences. Like I know Howard does. His experiences on the Atlanta campaign are very different, I think, than his experiences in the Eastern Theater. Like he writes about one of the battles, he ends up, I don't know, he thought he was going to lose his leg because he got shot in the foot, but the bullet had just ricocheted. But apparently it like hurt so much that he thought, I'm going to lose my leg. And he was laying there, and as he was laying there, he was thinking like, and he writes this in his memoirs, he's basically like, geez, I've already given my arm. Do they want me to give my leg now too?
Well, and then you think for all the Hancocks in the Chamberlains, you think of the poor David Irelands of the world who die of basically dysentery and just you're David Ireland. You survived Gettysburg. Yeah, brutal. Okay, people don't realize he fought Waxahachie. He fought a Ringgold Gap. He survives it all. His men are lying on their stomachs because the bullets just flying over their heads. He survives all that. He's the first officer into Atlanta
Yep.
Of course, he takes Hood's house because I would too. He takes the
Yep.
big house.
That makes
And then he's there, and 2 weeks later, he's dead of
Dead.
disease.
Yep.
I mean, that's a shitty thing right there.
No pun
You know?
intended.
Well, literally and figuratively for old David
Yep.
Ireland. Speaking of luck of the Irish, he didn't have it. But that's the reality too, is you could survive these battles in the heat of battle, and you still get felled. Every
Yep.
day, tomorrow is promised to nobody in this war, no matter
Yep.
what side you're on, no matter what position you're on. And to have the balls to keep going.
Yeah.
I think about the second South Carolina, Gettysburg, right there. That was the guns. Those the groups who got the wrong order, right? And
Yeah.
they're marching towards the Peach Orchard. Now they turn right to head towards the Stony Hill. They face their left flank at those cannon.
Yeah.
And you know what? They knew they're exposing their left flank to Bigelow's guns, and they're getting raked with canister, but they do it. They do
Yeah.
it. Okay. And so that those are the people you look back on. It's amazing when you think about these guys who did that stuff.
It's and I like the human stories to it as well, reading about what they did before battle or during battle, like just the things that happen. I mean, and yeah, you laugh every time I mention this, but my favorite one, and it's mentioned in that little Claiborne book that you gave me, talks about how when he's waiting for the men to come up at Franklin, he draws a checkerboard in the dirt. And I didn't realize this. I thought he had carried checker pieces with him. He didn't. They had to gather up leaves to use as the pieces.
Well, they did have that Chutes and Ladders board they played with.
That would be amazing.
A very underrated game, by the way, Chutes and Ladders.
Isn't it Snakes and Ladders?
No,
it's Snakes and Ladders.
It's Chutes and Ladders. What's wrong with you? It's stupid.
I had Snakes and Ladders as a kid.
It's Chutes and Ladders. Someone will give me an amen on this one. I promise you that.
Snakes and Ladders.
I don't know who you are anymore. but that's the thing, is you're sitting there, you're drawing up that chessboard, knowing this is probably going to be it for me.
Yeah.
So I better win this game, by the way. But second of all, this is the mentality that you're getting yourself mentally prepared to do whatever you're going to do. And I think about, those guys in, Kemper's brigade lying on the grass during Pickett's charge. And Kemper's guys were way up. They weren't in the woods. They were probably 100, 200 yards forward in that little swale, lying on their stomachs in the sun, watching, the chestnuts and the pine cones floating in the air because that 2-hour artillery barrage, but those 240, the 147 Confederate cannons, 122 Union cannons for 2 hours. And then you're going to get up from that, and then you're going to charge. That's baller. I'm sorry, that's something,
MJ just said, "What kind of board games you sell in Canada?" We had Snakes and Ladders. Oh, hey, Travis.
That just goes to show the difference in the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah.
You guys, if you win that game, you probably win what, like a wool coat or something?
Yeah, probably. I don't know.
Maybe a Canadian tuxedo, full denim. You win.
Snowshoes.
But it's definitely Chutes and Ladders, by the way. You can Google that if you don't believe me.
They used to be Snakes and Ladders.
I will take that to my grave. I'm right about this one.
Oh, the church bells are going off, so everybody gets to hear the stupid church bells.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it's a mass across the street. We live across the street from a church that reads church bells all the time. Mary hasn't burst into flames yet, which is a good sign. So,
God, but thinking of Claiborne playing checkers, chess, whatever it was, checkers. It's probably a way to calm him down, but it's also probably a way, like, if you're the commander, you need to kind of set the example. And he was probably trying to remain as calm as possible, knowing full well how bad it was going to be. And I mean, the one thing that I learned from that book that you got me was that, he did say to somebody, "I'm about to go get murdered with my men."
Yeah.
That's how he felt about those orders, was that he realized it was going to be bad. And I mean, the commanding, the subordinates to Hood, a lot of them didn't want to do it, but they had no choice. That's the thing.
No, you follow orders. Soldiers follow orders. Everyone has to follow. If the boss says go charge those breastworks, you charge those breastworks.
Yep.
That's the reality. You don't get to say yes and no. You don't get.
You don't be like, you know what? I'm going to sit this one out. I'm going to take a sick day. You can't do that. It's the Canadian football and board games. Snakes and Ladders.
I still don't know where the hell that comes from.
I'm going to look it up and show you. It's called Snakes and Ladders.
You guys are a different breed up there, I'm telling you. We grew up with all the classics down here, but that's the reality when someone goes on specifically talking about, well, Franklin did these, him doing that was idiotic and made no sense, and that's not a slight on even Hood. I mean, Hood had to make absolute sure Schofield didn't get across the river to get back to Nashville. You had to go for it. You had to do what you had to do. What Sherman said, war is hell, right? That's what he says. That's the reality. And but you follow your orders. No question.
You have to. And I mean, Sherman's a guy that saw a lot of shit in the war. So did Grant. All these guys saw a lot of bad stuff.
Sherman said that. He goes, I saw a lot of shit. That's what he said right in his memoirs.
Probably did too. I like the part where he and Polk are up in that mountain during the Atlanta campaign. There's a bunch of them up there, and the Confederates start firing at them, and everybody starts leaving because they're like, wow, it's getting a little bit too close for comfort here. And Sherman and Polk have this game of chicken up there to see who breaks first, and then they finally were like, whatever, go. Or not Sherman and Polk, Sherman and Hooker.
Right.
Yeah, Sherman.
Well, there's all that. That's why the diaries are fun to read. I've mentioned this before. I'll say it again. There's that one diary. God, I can't remember who else. But speaking of Gettysburg, now they were all in the cemetery.
Yeah.
And one of them writes home and says, we spent that in the cemetery. There was artillery falling upon us the whole time, and it was dangerous. And this kid's writing to his mother. His mother responds back, "Oh, I hope you were in hiding behind the gravestones." And he writes back to her, "No, I couldn't, because that's where all the officers were hiding." So it kind of shows you that the mentality of the foot soldiers back then probably obviously had left the corps guy. No question about that.
Howard actually spent one night in the cemetery because he writes in his memoirs he was so exhausted. And I think it was the night of July 2nd. He slept in the cemetery, and he said, "I didn't mind a gravestone for a pillow at that point because he had not slept that much." You think about like July 30th, he goes to meet with Reynolds, and he comes back from there. He leaves Moritz Tavern around 11 o'clock. So who knows when he gets back? Probably around 1 o'clock in the morning. He's awakened, I think, probably around 5 a.m.
Oh, before that.
Way before that, because Reynolds is awakened at 4:30, right?
It would have been before that, and then he would have been up that whole day. Then he would have been woken up the next day about 2 because Charles Payne came. To take the ride down with those guys. So these guys didn't sleep, and Meade talks about the sleep deprivation. Him specifically. Gelzo doesn't appreciate a good night's sleep. Apparently, that's part of the problem with him. But that's the reality. These guys are human, and
Rosecrans had sleep deprivation at Chickamauga. That was one of the things that I think factored into what happened, because besides the, in my opinion, the PTSD, but like the sleep deprivation too is, he's not sleeping because he's finally listening to Thomas, because Rosecrans did get arrogant after Tullahoma in thinking he had it. Like he just basically walked in to Chattanooga and was like, well, I guess I own the place,
Well, I think you to be a great general, you have to have a certain level of arrogance. You have that duende, that swag. They all did. And so that's because if you're a division guy, you look up at your corps guy, you look up at your who's running the army, and you're calm and you're confident and you're swaggy. Well, you're feeling pretty damn good about yourself. You don't want a guy who's going to be running and hiding.
No.
That's why Iverson got all that trouble at Gettysburg.
Yeah, because he was like, nope.
Well, whether he was drunk or not, he certainly was staying behind the 40 farm. He was hiding behind
the barn. But then who knows if it hit him at that point, right? Like this is the other thing too, is like what these guys are witnessing. They have a breaking point in what they see.
Yeah.
And like Rosecrans, it happens to him at Chickamauga. He's finally just, having Garrosh, his best friend, killed in front of him at Stones River. Everything that had happened just finally caught up with him. And I think that was it for him. He couldn't do it anymore. And I mean, thankfully you have Thomas, who was able to take charge and be like, this is what we need to do. We need to make sure we are holding the city. And then, those poor guys that get left behind, where Thomas has to say to them, you guys are going to get captured, but you need to do this.
Well, you need to have those men. You need to have the Charles Tillons of the world. You need to have the guys who are going to stay back and unfortunately be that road bump, the speed bump that's going to slow them down. And that's a different breed. You have 300 guys fighting all those companies coming down on you, all those brigades. And you have to be a different type to be able to do that. But you have to know that this is probably going to be it. And, and if you survive it, it's a miracle. That's part of the whole, that's not just Civil War. That's every war. I mean, there's always going to be the people that are going to need to be sacrificed. Fortunately, nowadays it's a different type of, you're not having much more infantry on infantry, type of situations, but all these wars, Revolutionary War, Civil War, World War One, obviously, with the ditches and the trenches.
The trenches,
that's reality. That's reality.
Yeah, and I think Chickamauga is one of those places where you read about kind of where the rock got his name and what happened there and how they held it as long as they could, right? You really gain an appreciation for it when you can see the ground and realize like that whole mile stretched, like it's a mile long line. So where the visitor center is today, all the way up to Snodgrass Hill is what the Union is trying to hold. It's the Lafayette Road. They need to make sure the Confederates are not getting by. And they're all along this 1 mile stretch. So can't even imagine how many soldiers that is. But the terrain is all different. It's like rugged and hilly and like roots. And I mean, I really commend Longstreet and Claiborne's guys for throwing up those 26 separate assaults at them, because that is shitty ground. I've walked up it before, and it's like you have to be careful because there's tree roots everywhere, and like I can't imagine running with a pack and a gun up
all the twisted ankles that must have happened in these battles that never gets reported. That's probably what killed Buster, probably originally.
Twisted ankles. Someone asked, do they still close the gates at the Gettysburg Cemetery?
No, usually they close midnight. They don't want people in there at nighttime. And those gates got a great history too. If you studied the Sickles era, that was one of those gates were the ones that surrounded the White House back in the day.
Weren't those wasn't that house that's by the cemetery, wasn't that where Meade met Howard and
they met him at the gatehouse?
Yeah, that's where they met after midnight or whatever time it was.
And the orphanage there, the old Rosa Carmichael Hotel, that was Howard's original headquarters right there when he got there. So, but yeah, they met at the gatehouse in the basement.
Elizabeth laughed at Buster.
Well, Elizabeth Thorne,
Howard tried to make a joke with her, like, you probably have to take all of it. She was like,
well, that was, he goes, you need to take your most prized possessions and get them out of here. And then he goes, well, you probably think everything here is a prized possession. And she's just like,
he's trying to be funny, and it's just so awkward.
He's that guy who tries to make jokes that falls on his face all the time. You just know exactly how he was.
So awkward. He's like Ned Flanders. I mean, we talked about the story many times on here. I love that story from where was it, Columbia, where that woman was like, this, and he's like, not now. And she was one of Sherman's girlfriends. So she comes to the HQ and she says right in front of Howard, like, one of your men was mean to me, like to Sherman. And Sherman's like, oh, who wasn't? He's probably thinking it's Blackjack or Jeff C. Davis, right? And then she's like, no, it was that guy, and points to Howard. And you can see Howard just kind of like,
they've heard the last guy. This is fixed.
Like this is the last guy Howard, the telling of it in his memoirs is so funny, because he says, he's like, I was kind of rude to her. I had too many pokers in the fire or something like that.
Yeah, he was saying, well, he definitely benefited. The town benefited from him. He left them all those cows, left them all those weapons, and they left. He definitely took care of the town when they left. So
Elsie said Howard was mansplaining. Yeah, he did. He mansplained her.
Oh, you could see Howard. He had a tough relationship with women.
Because I think he thought he was funny, but then it's awkward. It's like Ned Flanders. Like what does Ned Flanders say? Like fiddle dee dee or something like that.
Oakley dokley. First the snakes and ladders, and now you blow the Flanders quote. You got a lot to learn. Oakley dokley. But he's definitely Ned Flanders of the Civil War. But that's kind of fun with it. I mean, that's what we always joke around with MJ about him dating Cushman.
Yep.
Which obviously didn't.
MJ just said Cushman would have knocked Howard out if he tried that with her. The other thing too is, anniversary of Bentonville's today, is Howard's account of Bentonville, and he makes a joke about Slocum, saying about Slocum got there before me.
Yeah.
Basically, because the whole joke in that army, especially I think when they were out west, was Slocum was slow. So
well, they call him slow to come Slocum, and that was a big part of it. He was. Probably has more time doing his hair, kind of like you this morning. That's why we were late today too, by the way.
Slocum does have great hair.
I'm sitting here ready to go, and I get a hair dryer going. But geez, come on, 10 past 10. I wake up like this. Let's go.
God,
Chop chop.
true.
Um,
But I think like the Bentonville thing is, and you could tell like Howard's attitude when he's writing about Bentonville is a little bit more relaxed than say the rest of the Atlanta campaign and March to the Sea and all that. But I think it's because they knew the end was near.
well, they were sitting on the ball. I mean, there's a minute to go in the game. You got a big lead. You're not going to be running. You take a knee. You're going to take it slow. That's what Sherman was doing.
Yep. And I mean,
You know?
Bentonville is such an interesting study. It's sad too, though, because Hardee is there and his son is in the cavalry and he's like, Dad, can I go fight? And Hardee's like, yeah, it's going to be one of the last battles. And his son gets killed.
Yeah.
And that's like, so that's terrible. And so someone had to come across the lines and give Howard a message because Howard was really good friends with Hardee. But when Howard was professor at West Point, he had taught Hardee's kid math. He was like his math tutor or something like that. So that was one, and Howard talks about that, how sad that was, that his boy was like 18 or 19 and he'd been killed in what was one of the last battles, right, at this time. And I think that's, that must have been hard hearing that. You think you finally made it this far, right?
Well, that's the thing. If you get there late, you want to be a part of it. But again, it's just the risk. It's the risk you run.
Yeah.
And so that's always a challenge.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Yeah. But yeah, like I think Bentonville is one of those battles that is. I don't think a lot of people study it. And it's Bennett Place where the surrender happens, right?
Right, exactly. So you have, if you go there, the only place that's still available to see is the chimney. Yeah. But if you go, a lot of it's rebuilt, but you can go, and obviously it's not Appomattox. You don't get that same vibe from it. But that's a tough spot. That's where that they would have learned that Lincoln was assassinated when Sherman had to tell Johnson, and they were afraid of how the reaction was going to be the Union troops about that. And that's a tough thing. Sherman's surrender orders to Johnson, they get turned down by Stanton. They say no. And so there was a lot of shit that went down right there. And North Carolina doesn't have a lot of Civil War compared to South Carolina. I know I was in Charlotte a couple of years ago, and the only Civil War, there's a couple of monuments in the cemetery, but the site where Jeff Davis physically was, we found out that Lincoln was assassinated. There's a marker on the sidewalk that explains it, but there's not a lot.
Yeah. LC mentions that he loves Bentonville. He's been there twice and reenacted twice there too. Got to reenact on the actual battlefield. That's really cool. Yeah.
There aren't a lot of like Olustee, Bentonville. There aren't a lot that you can reenact on the actual fields for different reasons. But I know Bentonville is a big one too. But it's interesting to see.
I'd love to go there because Elsie said they let us dig in and make breastworks there too. Try that at Gettysburg, LOL.
Oh God, can you imagine that? They'd come get you.
It's like, hi, we're just like recreating the battle.
Yeah, they probably let a metal detect over there too.
Oh God. That's the one thing too at Chickamauga. You can still see some of the trenches because that's kind of Chickamauga. I think is considered one of the places where trench warfare started.
Well,
they dug trenches there.
My favorite places to go, obviously Kennesaw is great, but Spotsylvania's got great breastworks and the remaining stuff. You go to Muleshoe and you go see Emory Upton attacks and all that stuff. You have Hancock, you have Gordon, you have all the big names, Grant, obviously, but you can see how the breastworks still exist in Spotsylvania. They're pristine there too. They're really, really pretty. The
one place I want to go when we're at Chickamauga, and I've never been there before, but is where Claiborne was ordered to go that night. He had to fight at night, and because Bragg was like, I need you to go do this. And Claiborne was probably like, why? And then he captured, what was it, 2 cannons?
Yeah.
He was all proud of himself. He's like, I got two cannons out of it.
Hey, 2 cannons is 2 cannons, better than nothing.
But he was like all proud of himself. I got 2 cannons for us. Wow.
So we should probably talk a little bit about the episode we just did with Wayne. We haven't really talked too much about it.
Oh, we've talked
Gettysburg, briefly. But hopefully people who go to Gettysburg, this is the big year for Gettysburg, Mary. It's 160th. I don't know if you know this. It's 160th anniversary. And there's a lot of stuff going on in town. And Gettysburg Foundation, not just the ticket to the past, but the Children of Gettysburg is great. The evening with the painting, we got to talk about real quick.
Yes, the evening with the painting, if you go on to Gettysburg Foundation website, you can find out when they're holding it. I think they usually do it like once a month maybe or something. But Wayne mentioned, and this is true, it's always ends up being sold out. So the evening of the painting is you go and there is they give a talk, a licensed battlefield guide.
It's Chris Brenneman.
Yeah, Chris Brenneman. He does it. He's he's the co-author of the book about the cyclorama, which is an excellent book. Anyway, so you go and you learn not only like about like what the painting is, which is a Picus charge, but the history behind it, like, and little Easter egg, how the artists paint themselves into it, because there's different artists that
Right.
Phil Pateau, is that his name? Or
Philip Pateau. He
Yeah.
was the primary one, but all the little assistants, they're all in the painting.
Yeah.
They'll point them out. Lincoln's in the painting. You find little things like you see like this Armistead's riding a horse, that's wrong. They point
Yeah.
that out. They point out Hancock. They point out, you can see Lee, like where the
Yeah.
monument is, the Virginia monument. If you look close, you can see Lee down there. There's all these little things that you go. But what's
Yeah.
cool about it is you get to go underneath like the
So you get a behind the scenes tour that you wouldn't get regularly. So you get to go underneath and see where like how they have like these anvils that like they have to make the painting kind of bows out to make it look 3D. And when you get up close to it, it looks so obscure. Like you can't make out the figures. You have to be far away before you start seeing like what the painting actually looks like. When you're up close to it.
Yeah.
It doesn't
There
look
are
like anything.
there are images they just do the outline, never painted in size. They look like ghost images.
Yeah.
They're guys with no legs.
Yeah.
There are little things here that they point out to it. And it's pretty cheap, I think. It was like $20 or something.
Yeah, it's not bad at all. And if you're a member of the Gettysburg Foundation, I think you get a discount probably for it too. But like, I'm not 100% sure, but anyway, it's put on by Gettysburg.
I don't think so. I
maybe
think
not.
because I'm the Gettysburg Foundation, and I know. Although you got the tickets to that,
I think,
but if you sign up and you join the Gettysburg Foundation, if you're one of these Gettysburg people,
Yeah.
I think it's like $35 a year, but you get free admission to the visitor center, free
Yeah.
admission to the Wills House. You get discounts here and there. So it definitely pays for itself. If you go to the visitor center twice, it pays for itself an
Yeah.
entire year. You get you get a nice calendar, you get a nice little membership card.
Yeah.
But more importantly, you're donating money that's being used specifically to help do the things in town, like preserve the stuff, to help acquire new land, to all that stuff, because it's you certainly want to make sure that these places stay. And not every battlefield, I wish they did, but not every battlefield has a Gettysburg Foundation. There's not a Fredericksburg Foundation that I know.
No, there's Franklin has Battle of Franklin Trust, which is another one that is good to be part of as well, because that money goes specifically. I think Joe was on a roundtable a couple months ago and said like they'd purchased more land or something. They bought back more land, so they're buying back more land from Battle of Franklin. Frank says for the 160th, we should all meet at the famous Gettysburg Shoe Factory.
Yeah, should go to
And then MJ says me and Hancock will be the D here sign there.
That is going to be busy town. Because it's the weekend and it's the 160th. Good luck getting in the bars that weekend. Get their four score together like Boston St. Patty's Day. Get there at 7:00 in the morning and sit there all day at some of these. But that'll be fun.
And MJ mentions interesting to know in the cyclorama the artist places Hancock further north and in more correct location of where he would go down wounded. So that's interesting. And then Jim mentions there's also Friends of Stones River.
Right, there are definitely a few out there, but it's not like there are people, unfortunately, who go to Gettysburg and that's all they do. And that's their Civil War. And that's nothing wrong with it, but that's what they do. It's not like that in other places. And so, people look at the American Battlefield Trust as being the end all be all for land acquisition and all this stuff, but it's not just that. BOFT does a lot of Franklin, Stones River, obviously Gettysburg Foundation. There's a lot of that. And so support these. And a lot of it's, write the stuff off. It's a 501c3. So any donation you make to something like that, you can write that off.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of these places, and MJ mentions it too, like Gettysburg Foundation has great volunteer opportunities, like for the Remembrance Day, like the volunteers come in and read the names of the fallen as well. And she said that's a very emotional experience. I would love to go do that sometime, but I think these other places like, Battle of Franklin Trust, Friends of Stones River, like look into them all if you're in that area, and see if there's like volunteer opportunities or some way that you can help out, because all these, especially in like the post-COVID world we live in, money is being pulled from a lot of these cultural places and, battlefields and stuff, and they're having a tough time finding funding. If we want them preserved, like we're the ones that kind of have to start doing that. Charles mentions Manassas Battlefield Trust as well. So these battles have other things too.
Well, like I was saying, if you want to see how important Manassas Battlefield Trust and these type of places are, go onto Google Earth and pull up Manassas, Virginia. Okay, and you'll see the highway. And south of the highway is all strip malls, and north of the highway is the battlefield. And you see what that battlefield would look like today if it wasn't for the money put into that. And it is black and white. It's the best contrast of urban developments and battlefield preservation you ever see. I'm telling you, go into Google Earth and look at it. It's fascinating of how it just stops in this battlefield. And they would love to see rolling right through Northern Virginia. That land is worth a lot of money. It's a Washington, D.C. suburb. And people love to put up strip malls and housing developments and DQs, all the fun stuff they put up there. So that's why it's important to do that.
Yeah. Miranda mentioned Shenandoah Valley Battlefield Trust, and we have been to Cedar Creek. It's a beautiful battlefield to go to. What was that? The 8th Vermont?
8th Vermont was a good one. It was a private property. Right. Yeah. Actually a jump a fence, I suppose, but there's a lot of things you can do, and the volunteer opportunities. If you're really into this, definitely volunteer. I mean, obviously, a lot of these places all do volunteer stuff. Gettysburg Foundation, you can volunteer. They do the Spangler Farm. They do the Remembrance Day. Even the Civil War Museum up in Harrisburg, you can volunteer and help them out.
Yeah, they all need help with stuff because I mean, unfortunately, the pandemic. That's one of the first places that that gets cut is funding to cultural stuff, right? Again, it depends on like the government and, municipal, state, all that. MJ mentions many virtual volunteer opportunities out there as well. I helped write soldiers' stories for the Manassas anniversary event last year. So there's definitely things to do to help out, not just Gettysburg, but all these battlefields as well. Especially the ones that, because I mean, we're about to go out to Atlanta where Ezra Church is in the neighborhood.
Most of Atlanta was torn down and rebuilt again. I mean, there's not a lot of Civil War in Atlanta. There's just not, because they tore a lot of the buildings, got destroyed during the war, and they rebuilt it. And it looks like a modern day brand new city. There's still places to go up there and see. Yeah. It's kind of ironic.
You'll get to go over the Chattahoochee River, which wasn't that the meme you made with Sherman and Thomas and their floaties?
Well, there's stories where the men are sitting there bathing. All of a sudden, here comes Sherman, whips it out, pulls his all together, and jumps in the river and takes a bath in front of all of them. Can you imagine that? And so it's right in the river, right? You drive right over the highway, right over the Chattahoochee. And you go to Oakland Cemetery. You can go see where Gordon's buried, along with and you know who's buried there right around the corner again is Kenny Rogers, the gambler. So you can go see him too. So there's a lot.
So we're going to see Gordon and Iverson.
Gordon, Iverson, Joseph Brown's buried around the corner. Margaret Mitchell's buried there. Yeah. And what is sad though was a lot of the Confederate foot soldiers are buried there. There's a monument there and a lot of unknown dead and random Georgia guys. But they dug up, that was a slave cemetery. They dug up the slaves and got rid of them to put the Confederate soldiers there. There's a monument that explains that. It's cemetery. So it definitely has a solemn type of feeling to it too. But that's a cool cemetery. I'm pretty sure the Gordon statue is still there right downtown. I think it is. It was our last time, so I would assume it's still there. But there's a lot of cool stuff.
I wouldn't mind going to see that if it's still there, the Gordon statue.
That's right downtown there. And then as you get further out towards Kennesaw and Cheatham Hill and places like that, there's more and more to check the stuff out. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff to do in that area. Of course, Andersonville is not far away either. So
yeah, we're going to Andersonville as well. Frank mentions like that we need to have a list of virtual volunteer opportunities because he's out in California, right? So he's not near any of these battlefields. But if there's virtual opportunities for people, like MJ just said, like you can help write letters, and I think. Like Library of Congress was doing a transcription project a few years ago, and I wonder if they still are. If you can go on and you can transcribe historical documents as well, which is a great thing.
No, I mean, there are parts of California. Los Angeles has got a pretty good Civil War history. if you
Yeah,
think
someone
about it.
mentioned here that Armistead,
that's
was in the Los Angeles Mounted Rifles.
yeah,
Sorry, the war.
Hancock, and Albert Sidney Johnson. That's where they were at there when the war started. Rosecrans died in Los Angeles. He was buried right not far from where the LA Lakers played out in Inglewood, right down there. So there is some stuff. I'm not sure how much it's marked, but there is some stuff in LA that has some Civil War history to it.
Yeah.
I seriously doubt there's much marked there, but there is stuff. I mean, of all the stuff. So
yeah.
All right, we should already shut this off. It's almost noon already. Time flies, huh?
Yep, it does. Yeah. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. We will be back with you next weekend for our Facebook Live. We don't have a new episode.
No, but our next episode is
It's going to be with MJ.
MJ Henyon's going to be on with us. We're going to talk. She's on this chat right now. As a matter of fact, we're going to pick a date. I think we do have a date actually, and we're going to talk. We're going to talk about Pauline Cushman. She's the guru on Pauline Cushman. So we'll all learn a lot that day, and then we got some other stuff coming down the road. Pete Carmichael's going to be with us later next month to talk about the Futch letters at Gettysburg. We're going to talk about that. And we got some other fun stuff that's going to be in between. So anyway, I guess we're done. So we appreciate you listening, jumping on. Check out the episode. Wayne Motts is a great dude. He really is. I'd say he's a great fellow Mason, but we don't really exist, so I don't really say that. But he's a good guy. And take advantage of this 160th season for the battles that took place in '63. There's a lot of them. Yeah,
there's not just Gettysburg. There's also Chickamauga, Chattanooga, Vicksburg, all of those ones.
And there's a whole bunch. Second Winchester, obviously. Just go check them all out and go ahead and learn all this stuff, because you know what? Take advantage of it. Take advantage of people.
And I do have to say, I want to go to Franklin for the 160th in 2024.
Oh, absolutely. But just go out, whatever you do, go out there and do it, because a lot of people put a lot of time and effort into making this experience good, not just for that, and just for the young kids too. Check out the Children of Gettysburg 63 exhibit. Speaking of Gettysburg
Foundation. Just inspired Jay's on here. He said, he's like, just as I come in, we're leaving. And he said it was a great episode with Mont. So thank you for that.
No, I appreciate that. That's really, really cool. There's a lot of cool stuff to do, but check the stuff out. Everybody does this because it's in their blood. It's their passion. It's what they do. We hold this stuff sacred on both sides. So learn your stuff, keep an open mind, realize that some things you might have learned in the past might not be right. The more you learn, the better you'll be. Sharpen your iron, sharpens iron. Don't let anybody tell you you're wrong. Just tell them to just go ahead and keep learning and go with that. So, all right. So we are done. So we will talk to you soon, Mary. We'll see you here shortly. Hopefully your mood's better, and we'll look to we'll enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Elsie just mentioned the 160th at Tullahoma as well, and Ian from the UK said thanks everyone, and thanks to the two of us. So thank you, Ian, for joining us today from the UK. We appreciate all you guys coming on here for this silly little live stream we do. And we will be back with you next weekend, but then we're going to be we have a few weekends where we're traveling, because we're going to be in Richmond the first weekend in April. Our friend Lisa Samia is giving a talk at the Civil War Museum there. So if you're in the Richmond area, check that out. Saturday, April 1st.
It's April 1st. I ain't no fool. That's the truth. April 1st. So go check out her. We'll do some fun stuff in Richmond, I'm sure, while we're there. We'll do some live stuff, and then we're going to be in the following week. We're going to be in Georgia. We're gonna be hitting Andersonville, Ringgold Gap, Chattanooga, Chickamauga. We'll jump on live if we can to have some fun with that.
Yeah, we'll probably be doing a mix of YouTube live streams and Facebook lives. We'll see.
Hopefully experience some warm weather finally. Gosh.
Yeah. No kidding. So thanks, everybody.